Welcome to the DFS Build NFL edition. I'm Kevin Roberts, joined with Taylor Smith. We're going to break down the Week 2 Thursday Night Football DFS Showdown contest at DraftKings between the Dolphins and the Bills. The Bills, obviously, both teams are on a short week, but they are on the road. The Bills have won 4 straight games in this series. I think they probably have the defensive edge here, but it's not like the game totals suggesting a stingy game, even on a short week. It's good. What do we got? 49 game total. So we know both offenses are very capable of putting up points. In week 1, I think the Dolphins had 20, 26, and I know the Bills had 34 or something like that. So
I think Miami scored 20.
Okay, so yeah, facing the Jaguars, so maybe it was a bit more of a slower paced game for whatever reason. But yeah, okay, so it is an interesting game also because it's a division rivalry game, so we do have to just take into account that obviously these teams know each other and all that, but the game total suggests we should be in for some fun. Right off the bat, though, we do have injury news with Raheem Mostert is out, and we have to keep an eye on the status of Devon Achane because he is questionable with an ankle issue. So definitely Achane status is going to be a really big deal for what we want to do here, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Before we do, if this video helps you at all for the Thursday Night Football Showdown, please give it a like and also subscribe to the channel. All right, Taylor, right off the bat, let's look at the top tier options, which in my opinion would be Tyreek, Josh Allen, and a healthy Achane, if he's in, would probably slide in right behind those guys. Looking at those guys right now, they do have the top 3 projections, and they also are carrying the most ownership. So of that trio, I'm assuming you'd probably be looking at Tyreek or Josh Allen. What's your interest level as far as the captain goes with ownership and Achane status also in mind? Who do you think you'd be prioritizing in the captain slot?
It's hard to get away from those two because they're obviously the 2 highest projected scorers, maybe the 2 best fantasy players in the whole league this season, right, potentially. Great game environment, we think. Obviously, they're going to be chalky. I think, obviously, they're going to be the most popular captain plays, but there are ways to get different if you want to go cheaper with your flex spots. And for the most part, I did a 20 max build right before this, and I didn't really get too many others. Allen, I got to Hill most. He's in nearly half of them as the captain. Allen coming in below him, and then a dusting of Achane. Jeff Wilson, someone we'll talk about, I assume, a little bit, and then a dusting of Waddle, Cook, and Tua. So I have rules set like I always do for these slates, and I'm still getting mostly Hill and Allen. It's kind of hard to pass on the potential for 30 plus, 40 plus fantasy points in captain.
Yeah, I think this is usually if I see Mega Chalk up top, I right away go, okay, I know I want that guy, so I'll slide him over to flex, or I'll just be underweight if I'm running a lot of lineups, and I'll think about what other guys are going to be half the ownership or just significantly less that could possibly match them, or if they had a down game, where can I go that it makes sense? And it tends to work out okay, but this does feel like a slate, especially if Achane is not going to play just because he has such a high ceiling. I mean, it feels like it's Tyreek or Josh Allen in the captain slot. That doesn't mean you can't get different, especially if you're doing a lot of lineups. But this feels like a slate where eating that chalky captain isn't really a bad thing. I mean, Josh Allen has 40-point fantasy upside. We know Tyreek Hill has that too. And both these guys have really, really nice floors. I will point out that I don't think Tyreek did very well against the Bills last year. Josh Allen had one of his better games against them in the first game when they won 48-20. So I don't think you can go wrong, though. I think I would definitely lean towards Josh Allen just because I think it's a better matchup. He's had more success in the matchup, a little bit cheaper in the captain, and he's got the better projection. So I think across the board, it's probably Allen, then Tyreek for me. But if you want to go either way, that's totally fine. Now, speaking to Achane, what are we going to do with Achane here? Do you have interest in sliding him over them to get a little bit more contrarian? Because right now he's coming in at 6% less ownership than both of them. Obviously, he might not be 100%. If he doesn't play, we'll get to that. But if he plays and you're pretty confident he's going to be the full guy, because he had a pretty huge role in week 1. He had 18 touches or something. So how good do you feel about him in the captain slot? And then if you don't want to play him in the captain, are you planning to be overweight in the flex on him?
Yeah, like I said, he's my 3rd highest owned captain as of now. If he plays, I assume he will be full go. Like, I don't really see the point in keeping him active and then not using him. So I expect him to be pretty involved. I have him obviously a decent amount in both captain and in flex. It's just hard to get away from the top two in captain. And in the top lineup, I see that is an HN captain lineup. It's fading both Allen and Tyreek. So going pretty off the board. Obviously, that's just going for a game script that doesn't have either of those guys going insane. So it's not unreasonable.
Seems unlikely.
Like you said, he had a huge role last week. He got a goal line touch, I think, at least one. So that's something we didn't really see a lot out of him last year. The injury is alarming. I saw he's expected to play, but he's not like officially in yet. So I'm just assuming he's going to play. But even if he's in, I still expect Jeff Wilson to get some reps. We saw Wilson get a few carries last week as well. Mostert played almost half the snaps, so I don't think it's a situation where Achane is going to be suddenly playing 70%, especially since he's hurt. So even with Achane in, I think there's still merit to getting to Jeff Wilson, and I suppose you can make a case for the rookie as well, although I'm far less confident in Jalen Wright, considering he didn't play at all last week.
Yeah. I mean, Jalen Wright is the better player when compared to Jeff Wilson. So I think let's just check real quick and look at the flex ownership with those guys. Sorry about it on the floor. So we're looking at Jeff Wilson coming at 21% owned in the flex. Honestly, I have interest in both of these guys, even if Achane is in, for a couple of reasons. Obviously, he could get hurt again, or he could be a decoy and just be limited. So those two things are very real possibilities. He's obviously, it was talked about all summer that, Achane is a risky pick for season-long fantasy football because he got hurt like 3 different times in his rookie season, and he's super tiny and kind of frail. So it's already happened. Miami could definitely play it safe with him for sure here and just kind of rotate their guys in. So Jeff Wilson makes sense in the flex at almost 22% ownership. You could play him with Achane or without. But honestly, Jalen Wright is more appealing to me. Where is he on here? He's coming at 16% ownership. He's a little bit cheaper, a little bit lower owned. As long as he's active, I think he is, a more fun try in GPPs. But yeah, Jeff Wilson does seem like the safer play at the moment. And obviously, I'd be a lot more interested in Jalen Wright if Achane is out, because that then Wright would get a decent amount of work. All right, sliding back over to the captain spot. I think it just is what it is. We should have a lot of interest in Achane if he's active. He's absolutely viable in the captain. Pretty good flex play too. But if he's out, we're going to be looking at Jeff Wilson and Jalen Wright quite a bit. Whether you don't have to captain them, obviously, but they are captain viable. All right, so moving on. If we wanted to get more creative in the captain slot and look for guys who maybe can match Allen and Tyreek up top, obviously the first guy to me that stands out after Achane would be Jalen Waddle. I mean, obviously Miami kind of takes turns with which guy goes off sometimes, so it could absolutely be a Jalen Waddle week. You never know. He's way cheaper than Tyreek Hill, and he's not that far off as far as fantasy point projection, but he is coming in at 6% less ownership. So what's your interest level in putting Jalen into the captain slot? And if you're doing that, do you think you would ride with a full stack with him and Tyreek and Tua, or do you think you would probably just split them up in lineups?
The 2 Waddle captain lineups I'm looking at don't have Tyreek, and they do have Tua. So that's the way I'd be leaning right now. I just think if Waddle is the captain, pays off at the discount, it's a decent chance that Tyreek Hill is not having a ceiling game. So I'm willing to play for that, especially, you said Tyreek Hill did not play particularly well against Buffalo last season. I don't think 2 games is enough to draw conclusions, but it is what it is. Perfectly fine play. I think he had over 100 yards last week with Tyreek going off. So there's a path to both. It's a very condensed target share between those two in the passing offense. So we know where the ball's going. He's a perfectly fine captain. I think James Cook is okay too if you want savings at a similar salary. I have a rule where if Tua is my captain, I have at least 3 Miami pass catchers in the flex, just because if Tua has that ceiling game where he's going off, in theory, his receivers are all benefiting as well. So I don't have a ton of Tua captain lineups. The non-rushing QB is generally not a guy I want to captain, but I have a dusting of him.
Yeah, that is interesting. I would not use that same rule for Josh Allen just because just because we know he can get a lot of his production all on his own. And by the way, they don't really have like an alpha for the Bills, so they're going to spread it out. Good luck picking who that guy is that's going to hit, but they do also have some interesting options, which we're going to talk about now. I agree on James Cook. He's viable in the captain, 19 carries the last week. Miami, not really the best matchup on the ground against the run. They were 4th against fantasy running backs in points per game last year. Rushing yardage allowed. Let me see where they were in fantasy points per game. They're still 4th. So that actually makes sense. But yeah, so it's not the most amazing matchup. And obviously Cook needs to blast a big run to pay off, just because he's not always super involved in the passing game, and he is not really their go-to guy in the red zone. It's going to be Ray Davis and Josh Allen for the most part. All right, moving on here. Other guys that are a little bit interesting. Keon Coleman is obviously very, very talented. Really nice price, 8.7K to slide in at captain. Obviously, if you like Josh Allen a lot, Keon Coleman has to be on your radar. Let me just pull up his game log and see what his snap count was last week. Let's see. 73%. He had 9 fantasy points, 5 targets, 4 catches. So that role looks pretty good to me. Obviously, you can also look at, come all the way down here, Khalil Shakir. He's a little bit more expensive, just as volatile, but he's going to be less owned than the captain. And then another guy I really, really like is going to be Dalton Kincaid. 10.8K seems like an okay price going up against the Dolphins. He was not very involved last week, just 1 catch on 2 targets. So, I mean, he's not going to be very owned. 3% captain, probably not very owned in the flex either. Thing is, the Dolphins shut down Evan Ingram, only 1 catch for 5 yards last week. But last year, I think they were the 4th worst defense against tight ends in fantasy points allowed per game. So if that logic holds, Kincaid looks really interesting. And also, he had one of his better games against them in the finale last year. So of that group of guys, the Buffalo Bills passing weapons, and by the way, I will throw in Curtis Samuel here too for you to consider. Let me just check how he was doing in week 1 as far as his snap percentage. 27%. Not great. Okay, so those are the main guys, though, we're looking at for the Bills pass catchers. Are any of those guys, you're confident in putting into the captain slot, and or how do you feel about sliding them over to the flex if you're, most likely captaining Josh?
Yeah, I'm not going to captain any of them. I don't think. It's just kind of hard. Like I said, I'm pretty condensed with Tyreek and Josh Allen, and then a dusting of the other guys, Waddle, Cook, Achane, maybe some Tua. I do have the inverse rule for Allen, where if I have at least 3 Bills pass catchers in flex, then I'm forcing Allen to be the captain in those lineups. But like you said, I'm not doing the thing where I'm not doing the thing where if Allen is the captain, I have to have at least 3 Bills pass catchers. It's only if the lineup has 3 to begin with, then Allen should be the captain. But there are captain Allen lineups that don't have 3 Bills pass catchers. The only other captain, the only cheap captain I'm looking at is Jeff Wilson. Even with Achane projected in, he's cheap enough where you can play him there and still get a lot of good stuff around him. Obviously, he's only 3.6 in the captain spot on DK. And the role should still be okay. Like Mostert and Achane thrived together last year. Not saying Wilson is Mostert, but he should have a role regardless, and he's cheap enough to where I think you can captain him.
Yeah. I mean, okay. So like I always say this every time we talk about showdown slates, you can captain whoever you want, because obviously anybody can just go off, and it's the NFL. Like, this is variance is king. Like a backup tight end can come in and score 2 or 3 touchdowns. You just never actually know what's going to happen. Obviously, Tyreek and Josh make the most sense, especially on this slate, because they're just the most reliable and they have the best proven ceiling. So can you consider Dawson Knox at 3.9K? Sure. One guy that does look a little bit interesting, though, if you do want some punts to slide into captain, is Mac Hollins at 2.4K, because he played a good amount in week 1. Let me just see. I know he scored a touchdown, so he was definitely involved. He played 58% of snaps, had 2 catches for a touchdown. So obviously not a like super concrete role, but if they're not going to play Curtis Samuel a ton and they're just kind of rotating these guys in, I think Mac Hollins at 2.4K is an okay dart throw in a small percentage of your lineups. I'm not really digging much else here. I mean, is there anybody else that you are maybe not necessarily captain? Let's actually flip it over to the flex and discuss this and see where their ownership's at. Because as we go down here, obviously Jeff Wilson, Jalen Wright need to be on our radar no matter what. Coming down, let's see. So Matt Collins at 1.6K, not super owned at all, 10% in the flex. I like that. Jonnu Smith at 2.8K, not very owned in the flex. Starting tight end for the Dolphins. I think he's viable. And then Ray Davis, the backup behind James Cook. Any of these guys looking interesting to you?
I had some Jonnu last week, but he wound up playing less than a third of the snaps, which is a little bit alarming.
Not good.
He played less than Julian Hill and less than Durham Smythe. So, yeah, Julian Hill, I don't really know what the deal is with him. I assume he's more of a blocker because I don't think he was very involved either. They just haven't historically thrown to the tight ends much to begin with. Like, they're cheap. The one I'm inclined to throw a dart with is Smythe at 1K. But, you know, like you said, it's the NFL. Anything can happen. I'm just not really getting to Jonnu since his role looks like it's shit. The punt I have the most of is Reggie Gilliam because he's $200. He played 6% of Buffalo snaps.
Oof.
It's just because he's $200. I think he's in one
Right.
line. Like, he's just a full punt to get you what you want elsewhere. It's a couple of Tyreek Hill captain lineups that have Josh Allen and all the other good stuff. Hard to have a strong take on defense or kicker. Like, the Niners kicker was optimal the other night because he kicked 6 field goals.
Sure was.
A couple of them over 50 yards. So obviously you can play for that. Jason Sanders, Tyler Bass, whatever. Like, I have more Sanders as of now. Seems like a dart throw. Defenses are hard sells in a game with a high total, but again, like, one defensive touchdown and you're kind of golden. I'm not captaining the defenses or the kickers in this game, but all are still in the player pool in the flex spot.
Yeah, I think the only hard stance I ever have on defense is if they're going to be really chalky, then I just fade. And then I just hope that it's an explosive game. So in this case, you can flip it the other way. It's got 49 total, 2 very good offenses, but it's a Thursday night game, a short week. Miami's down one of their better players. You absolutely could argue for one of the defenses because they're not going to be very owned.
And
I'm
the
not
Bills
that interested.
offense is still like a work in progress. Like, they're working in these new guys. They basically overhauled the passing game completely, and they didn't look great in the passing game last week.
No, not early on for sure. I mean, they did a really good job, like in the second half, they exploded, but you're not wrong about that. So absolutely, if they're going to be unowned, you could play one or even both of these defenses and just go the other way and bet that this game is going to hit the under, and that we're going to have turnovers. And like you said, maybe a defensive touchdown, what have you. I still think, logically speaking, I'm not super into either defense. I probably would just be going away from them, but you absolutely can do that. As for the kickers, if this game is going to hit and go over the total, there's going to be points. So you absolutely can hit with either of these kickers. You could roster both of them just because it's a guaranteed decent amount of points, provided they're not only kicking extra points the whole game. Jason Sanders and Tyler Bass both look totally fine, and they're not going to carry that much ownership. Obviously, I would just prefer Bass just because he is going to be a little bit less owned. All right, so I think that kind of covers everything. I think the number one thing you have to figure out is what we're going to do with Achane. Is he in or is he out? Once we find out, we can make that call. For the most part, I'm probably going to slide him over to flex if I do play him. I am most likely, though, going to be very underweight on him if he's in, and I'm going to target Jeff Wilson or Jalen Wright, and I am going to mix them both as long as Jalen Wright is active. Jalen Wright is just more appealing to me because I know how explosive he is, and I know he's going to see the ball at least a little bit, even if Achane is in, and he's going to be a little bit less on the Jeff Wilson because everybody is viewing Jeff Wilson as this like auto smash play if Achane is out, right? So that's just the way I look at it, but that does not mean you can't play Jeff Wilson. I think we're aligned here. Josh Allen and Tyreek Hill look like just awesome captain plays. I don't think we have to get that cute here, but if I'm going to deviate from that, if I'm running out a lot of lineups, I think my 2 favorite captain plays to slide in there, if we want to kick it back to captain for 1 second, based off of ownership, would be Dalton Kincaid and then one of Jeff Wilson or Jalen Wright, assuming, and probably I would go a lot with the one who's lower owned. What is your overall take and strategy for the slate?
Yeah, like, not really going off the board with captain. It's just kind of chalk I'm eating. I think basically anyone besides Hill or Allen is going to be contrarian enough.
True.
Or I'll mix them in a bit. Jeff Wilson is kind of the salary saver right now I'm planting my flag with, just because he should have a role with Mostert confirmed out. Obviously, that gets a little different with Jalen Wright if Achan's also out. Not expecting that to be the case. Kincaid, have a good amount of him. James Cook, like just kind of dart throws with these guys like Smythe and the Bills receivers. It's really hard to have conviction with them, considering how many of them there are and how unproven the situation is. So you don't have to rely on them in Josh Allen lineups because we know he can get there by himself. So yeah, it's kind of wide open. It should be a pretty fun, high-scoring game. I think I have a bit more Miami overall as of now, but it's Showdown. Literally anything can happen and will probably.
It's very true. All right, that is going to do it for us. Hopefully this breakdown helps you a little bit, pushes you in the right direction, and you have an idea of, player projections and player ownership. Obviously, that can and will change before the slate goes live tonight, so be sure to refresh and also account for any injury news, obviously starting with HN. All right, if this video helped you in any way, please give it a like and also subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching and good luck.